Thank you for joining us for this episode of Inside Town Hall. I'm your host, Madeline Shields. November is Hunger and Homelessness Awareness Month. And in the past few months, we have heard many discussions about the needs of our homeless population and people who are living in poverty. Joining me is newly elected City Councilor Rich McCorris. You were elected in April of 2022, and this is your first time on Inside Town Hall, so thank you for joining us. So before we start talking about some of the work that you've already done as a city councilor, let's get to know you a little bit. Rich, tell us about your background.
Great, thanks for having me. Looking forward to it. I grew up in Sioux Falls, going to elementary school here, the Horseman, near corner of 26th and Cliff. Went to the University of Sioux Falls to study math, become a math teacher, but then kind of career plans changed a little bit and really entered into the nonprofit world after that, and also pastoral work as well. So my main work has been in nonprofit fundraising and also some pastoral work here in Sioux Falls over the last 10 to 20 years.
Tell us, why did you want to run for city council?
I've always had a real interest in politics and in government. Been watching very closely since my time at the University of Sioux Falls, where Kermit Staggers was one of my professors. And but also a real passion for core neighborhoods in Sioux Falls, recognizing that with Sioux Falls' explosive growth, lots of things happening, we've got some core neighborhoods that continue to need renewal and focus, and so I got a real passion for that. And then also the housing challenges that we have in our community and trying to bring some awareness to that. And then ultimately also just different challenges, whether it be mental health, addiction, homelessness, and how we as a community can make positive impact.
And you talked a little bit about how you're a pastor of King of Glory Church, correct?
Yes.
Is that kind of what has led you to wanting to help people where they are at in our community?
I think the biggest thing that's kind of moved me on that front has been my work in the nonprofit world. And just, I tell people all the time that once you put a name with a face, your passion kind of changes. And so in 2007, 2008 is really when I started volunteering at the Furniture Mission quite often. That volunteering then led to situations where you just met someone, met a child, and then through work with the police department as a chaplain, again, that name with the face changes things in a hurry of when you become passionate about a different issue in the community.
Yeah, talk a little bit about your work as a volunteer chaplain.
I did that for about 10 years or 11 years, served with the Sioux Falls Police Department, Minnehaha County Sheriff's Office. Whenever they would run into a situation of having to make a death notification, they would call and I would go along with them to care for the family, deliver news to the family, and then help the family take that next step. And then also going on ride-alongs once a month with police officers, just to be there with them, hear about what's going on in their work as well.
So you've had a vast I don't know, I guess experiences of dealing and learning about, I guess it's just helping people, you know, face to face, like you said. How does that change once you get to know someone? You know, you talk about, you know, knowing that there are people living in poverty or being homeless or challenges. How does it change when you can actually get to know their name and have a conversation?
I think the biggest thing is it removes a lot of the assumptions that you come in with. Sometimes we put a lot of easy answers on things in life. When you actually sit down and get to know someone, you find out in a hurry that this is way more complex. It's not just, hey, stop drinking X. It's way more complex than that. Or, hey, go get a job. There's, what about a car? What about who taught me when I was growing up to be at work on time? You know, I wasn't born just knowing I should be at work on time. Somebody taught me that. And so understanding maybe people didn't have that history themselves in different dynamics. Have you found through meeting people and learning about them that we kind of have more in common than we have differences? Yeah, I think that's really good. Madeline, you said it really well there. At the end of the day, I think we hang out with people who are just like us most of the time. And the reality is those who are different than us, we have a lot more in common. Even if politically we're different, we still have a lot more in common, or socioeconomically, we still have a lot more in common. At the end of the day, I think one of the big things we don't realize is the need for relationship. Wherever you're at in the community, people need relationship, and that's a commonality across the board. You mentioned that you did some work with, first off, with the Furniture Mission. However, you have moved on to doing a lot of collaborative efforts about with development of the Empower Campus. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and what is the Empower Campus for people who may not know it? Yeah, I was honored to serve on the board of directors for Empower Sioux Falls, which took ownership of the old South Dakota School for the Deaf site, and then we've tried to transform that into what we describe as a place where people are unified in service. And so there's different agencies that are there, all focused on serving people. So we've got everything from Boys and Girls Club, childcare, to Center of Hope, bikes, clothing, community outreach, utility assistance, and then Children's Inn is in the process of moving there right now and become the family shelter here in our community. And then Furniture Mission will be moving and building there as well in the next couple of years. And so the goal is to unite in service to the community from one place.
Can you talk about why it's so important to have all of those resources on one campus?
I think most people don't realize that anyone that's going for assistance wherever is never getting assistance only from one place. From my experience, most people are getting assistance from 4 to 6 different agencies at the exact same time. And so it can be a lot of work going from agency to agency to agency. The goal was, if you're getting rent assistance at the community outreach, you could also go talk to the Center of Hope about clothing for work, or Compassion Child Care about daycare for your family. And then ultimately Children's Inn, with being there, there'll be daycare right there. Furniture Mission, people that are transitioning out of the family shelter, maybe they can get hooked up with the Furniture Mission to get those furniture for their next apartment.
So you're doing a ton of things, but you're not alone in this. You have a family.
Yeah.
Want to tell us a little bit about that? They must either be helping you or supporting you in some.
I've got a great family, a lot of fun, and the kids are ultimately our driving force. Got my wife Shannon teaches here in Sioux Falls, special education at John Harris, and been doing that for a number of years. And I have 3 children that go to Eugene Field Elementary here in Sioux Falls, and involved in theater, involved in gymnastics. So they're at a fun age right now, very active, and also like to just go along and do stuff when we're doing stuff in the community.
Well, you're busy.
They keep us moving.
Exactly. So in these few short months, you have started the ground running, and we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to learn about the work that City Councilor McCorris has already started on his time at the City Council, and starting with the Homeless Task Force. We will be back in just a moment.
Hi, I'm Dr. Roush with Falls Community Health. Did you know that 1 in 5 U.S. adults and 1 in 6 youth experience mental illness each year? Did you also know that the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline number is now 988? It is easier than ever to reach out and be connected to a trained counselor. All you have to do is call or text 988. If you are feeling down and thinking about hurting yourself or others, just call or text 988 and someone will be there to help 24/7. So if you or a loved one are in need of help, don't hesitate to text or call.
Welcome back to Inside Town Hall, where we are visiting with newly elected City Councilor Rich McCorris. He began his work on the City Council you were elected in April. When did you start?
May.
In May, yep. Okay. And then I did mention at the beginning of the show that it is Hunger and Homelessness Awareness Month across the whole country. And so you have led the charge on a homeless task force. Do you want to explain to our viewers what exactly is that, if they haven't heard about it already, and what is the purpose?
Yeah, great. In June, the City Council formed a homeless task force with the goal of identifying some tactical action steps the community could take to be very intentional in how we care for the homeless population in our community, recognizing that there's been some growing needs, growing challenges, maybe some people would say. Specifically, I think the council gets a lot of contacts around panhandling, sleeping in parks, and so it had been a couple of years since we really took an intentional effort, and so the council put together a very temporary task force to decide if there's any action steps the community could take.
Okay. And through your work with that, there are 13 members, I believe. What have you learned by bringing this diverse group together?
It's been really interesting. We brought together people who have experience working on the front lines, working at one of our shelters or leading a nonprofit or leading fundraising. We have a couple members that have firsthand experience that have been homeless or been in the justice system. And then we've got other members that are more community-wide focused. And so it's been interesting watching the dynamics of someone who really lives in it every day, trying to explain to others kind of what the perspective is and what's really going on behind the scenes. But there's been a lot of good questions asked, and I think one of the big things was the amount of information that's just been shared that people have tried to understand and engage in.
So you collected a lot of information, and then what's the next step? You have recommendations that you are bringing forth to the City Council. Yeah,
we're bringing forth recommendations to the City Council and the Mayor, asking them to consider some specific things, and then we're also saying, hey, here's some things that you need to be aware of. There might not be specific actions right now, but be aware of what the conversation's happening in the community, and there might be an action that needs to be considered down the road a little bit further.
So what are some of these recommendations that your committee has come up with?
I think one of the big ideas that's been talked a lot about and really came from things happening in other communities is a concept called a street team. I've personally spent some time in Rapid City. I've spent some time in Minneapolis, shadowing some groups that go out and visit individuals who are panhandling, sleeping in parks, etc. And it's really a different approach in our country of saying, hey, the first intentional step we need to take is sending trained individuals to understand what's going on in the people's lives that are participating in this and going on. One of the goals of that is to really reduce law enforcement calls. We definitely have a growing number of 911 calls for individuals that would be considered loitering or in parks, on street corners. And so one of the goals here is to take that pressure off of law enforcement and send some other individuals and say, hey, well, can we get you into a continuum of care? We've got so many resources in this community, Madeline, as you're well aware. And so how can we get people connected to those resources? And we think these street teams are one way of taking a proactive approach. Obviously, law enforcement are still going to be involved, and people might still call 911 depending upon the situation. So that would be a pilot project that we'd be recommending for the mayor and the city council to consider. And I think it has potential to make a difference.
What can, so if you put this street outreach committee together, are those volunteers, are those paid people? How is that going to work?
They would be paid staff, and I think the goal would be is to find another organization in the community that would really operate this. This is not going to be government employees, city employees. This is going to be us entering into a contract with an organization or a nonprofit, asking them to run this pilot project for 2 years to see what kind of impact that it makes. And they'd be paid employees, trained individuals that know how to questions to ask, how to engage with individuals, the services that are available.
And you know, you talked about all the different resources that are out there, and if people can come and not have the police come all the time, because you know sometimes that creates more angst and anxiety, and if you have just citizens approach people. How do you think that will work, and have you found that it works in other communities? Have you researched it?
Yeah, I got time spent in Rapid City actually following a program called Journey On, and I went out actually on multiple visits with them when they would get a call. Now they're in that community, they are tied into the 911 system. And so sometimes they are dispatched that way. In other communities like Tulsa, Oklahoma, there's a specific number that's called by businesses, nonprofits, or community members, and they're dispatched through that. And so I got an opportunity to see firsthand, going out visiting with individuals and watch them ask the questions and then discern where should they get them connected to right now. And some of it, they got them connected. Other instances, it didn't happen, and they moved along. And it wasn't until the 17th visit that the person said, right, you know what, yes, today I'm going to go and check out this resource that exists. But it's taking a proactive approach, and you never know the day that someone might say, today's the day, yes.
Right, so one thing, I guess it has to be cautionary, because it's not a quick fix, because absolutely, you know, people have free will, and they may be approached and say, yeah, there's these 10 resources. You can go stay at the shelter, you can eat a meal here, these people have clothes for you, but yeah, I don't want to do that. You know, how do you convey that message to people and say, you know, it might take 17 times without creating frustration?
one of the big things of the public and how we do this, we're not totally sure yet, is we need the public to understand that the complexity of the issue, because we're working with people. And so we need people to understand that the homeless numbers aren't going to change overnight. And our goal wasn't to eliminate homelessness. Our goal was to take intentional, healthy steps towards engaging with individuals. And so I think as a community, we need to help our community members understand that it's very difficult, it's complex, it's never a simple answer.
And what have you looked at the cost associated with these outreach teams?
There's going to be a cost that we're recommending the city offer a contract. We believe we'd be about $500,000 over 2 years, offering a 2-year grant per se to an organization. We've looked specifically at Rapid City, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Salt Lake City, and kind of the resources they set aside. We want to make sure to recommend to allocate enough funding where we make a good enough effort so that we can do a good review in 2 years. We don't want to just say, hey, let's try something for a couple of hours a week, and we can't really give a thorough review in 2 years to say, did we make an impact and a difference?
Right. And is the goal to get people off the street, even if it's temporary, then to transitional, and then maybe to a permanent place?
Great question. I explained it this way a little bit. The goal is to get them in a continuum of care. Everybody's at a different place. It might be for someone to get them to one of our emergency shelters. Another person might get into transitional housing depending upon their context. Another might be to get to the link and then get from the link to a treatment service in Sioux Falls or outside of Sioux Falls. And so getting a person connected into that continuum of care would be the goal.
Okay. What kind of education component is going to be involved in this, just to make, the business owners who have the panhandlers outside of their business? How do you get the people who are affected by homelessness and poverty, most, right in front of their business maybe, or in front of their homes? How do you reach them and try to get their cooperation?
One of our recommendations in this task force is a public education campaign, and don't know the exact details of what that looks like yet, but maybe it's a one-page landing page where we encourage business owners, hey, go to SiouxFallsHomeless.org, and you're encountering a situation. This will tell you exactly how to make a contact with the street team, or it'll tell you the resources that are available, how to contact one of our emergency shelters or transitional housing, and then also help people understand, hey, here's some things you want to learn more about homelessness. Or for example, one of the questions we get a lot about is panhandling. Why isn't it a good idea to hand cash out the window? And so putting some education out there that sometimes cash does more harm, and helping people understand, I want to do something, what should I do? Here's some specific steps you can take.
Sure, and I think that is the challenge right now, is people, they don't want to give cash, but then they think if they give the money, it'll help in some situation. And I think a lot of panhandlers treat that as a job.
Yes.
They are very precise on how they solicit, and it's work for them. Just with my experience with some homeless people is, I can make more money panhandling than getting a job and working for 8 or 9 hours a day. How do you change their mindset from that? Is that something that you see as a challenge? That's
probably one of the biggest challenges. Is there's probably different groups. Some are panhandling as their job, as you say. Some are panhandling to make up that difference from Social Security income or whatever it might be.
Sure.
And others are panhandling out of sheer desperation. They don't know where else to turn. I think if we can make an impact on the sheer desperation group, out of the group that's panhandling for that gap, and then it's going to take much longer time to make a difference in the panhandling group that's doing it intentionally because they found they're actually pretty good at it. And so convincing them otherwise is not just a one-time conversation.
Yeah. And do you then want the citizens to say, you have to have patience because we have to work through this process?
I really want to encourage the citizens to have a long-term view on the situation and say, hey, ask your city officials, your county officials, are we taking intentional steps? Now, if they're not taking intentional steps, you should get after your elected officials, but hopefully hold us accountable on taking intentional steps to making a difference, and it's going to be a 2-year, 5-year window. Are we seeing an impact?
Sure. Let's talk a little bit about, you talked about the continuum of care, and then you want to also encourage the community and I guess nonprofits to all participate in the Helpline Center's network of care. Why is that important?
I hope everybody's aware of the helpline in Sioux Falls, 211, very popular. If you're not aware of it, get familiar with 211 helpline. Helpline's got what's called the network of care, where they encourage nonprofits to share a database of information. So if I come into your agency or you come into my agency, I've got information about you because you've already gone into another agency, and we share a database system and do intake alike. So that way I know if you've received services somewhere else or what services you haven't received. What we want to do is encourage all the entities in Sioux Falls that are working with the homeless population or others use this community service that's available that the Helpline Network of Care has started. There's a cost to it. And we all know that nonprofits are seeking to raise funds, meet their budgets. We believe we need to put forth some funds to help these nonprofits launch into the Helpline Network of Care over 3 years. Kind of the first year, take care of all the costs. Second year, take it down a little bit. Third year, take it down more. So nonprofits have a time to build their budgets appropriately to have the Helpline Network of Care. And I think it'll create communication and create collaboration. I use the example all the time that it's easy to tell people, hey, get along and work together, but that doesn't always work. You got to say,
right,
hey, here's something specific that you can do, and then I think that'll create the collaboration.
So I think that collaboration, just to simplify it a little, you have a family that arrives in Sioux Falls and they're homeless. They check into a homeless shelter. However, they also need to go to Falls Community Health for some medical care. They need to go to Feeding South Dakota to get some food. These are the collaboration. That way, one particular family could be tracked by all these different agencies, and they could know they got bus tickets from Center of Hope, they received clothing from the St. Vincent de Paul, and so that anyone who has access to this database can see you already got bus tickets, you already got help with food stamps and things like that. Is that kind of what you want to do?
You said it much better than I did. Well, that's exactly what we want to see happen. Is I think everybody in our community doesn't want to see the duplication of services. Mm-hmm. And so this, I think, lowers the duplication of services, and it also allows an agency just to come alongside a person and understand where they're at much better, because you're seeing the whole picture of what they're involved in.
Sure. And the Helpline Center has been working on this for many years. There have been different degrees of cooperation going on, so it's not brand new.
This is not brand new. I think great point, Madeline. One point I want to make on that is one of the main factors of this is now HIPAA compliance.
Sure.
So that is a new element in it, and so they've been doing great work, and many agencies have been participating in it, but the HIPAA compliance does bring some new regulation and some new fees with it, all of which is important. We want to encourage that right now.
Sure. Let's talk a little bit about how we can get Minnehaha County help through Minnehaha County as well as the City of Sioux Falls collaborating together.
Yeah, you know, Minnehaha County, most people day to day don't pay attention to county services, but county services is a huge aspect of our community. They're carrying the majority of the load when it comes to social services, caring for individuals in our community. Many years ago, the city and the county came together and created the Safe Home, a place for chronic homeless to live that are really struggling with substance abuse. I think one thing that maybe has been neglected from my personal perspective has been we did it once, but it necessarily hasn't grown as the community has grown. And so we need that type of model, what many would consider a housing first model, help people get into a safe and affordable place to live first, and then begin to work on other things that they're struggling with. We want the city and the county to come together again, not necessarily build another building, maybe build another building, we don't know, but have conversations about how can we duplicate, how can we reproduce those efforts of a housing first model to individuals who are struggling, and what can we learn from the Safe Home model that was done.
Yeah, so there are many different facets of trying to house people who suffer from different ailments. You may have people who are not using alcohol and drugs, but they have mental health issues, or you have people who are justice involved and they are felons, and there are so many crime-free multi-housing units that it's really difficult to house people who have a felony. Can you talk a little bit about how a cooperation or a collaboration might be able to help all of these different entities?
I think having that point person or point group that's kind of taking the lead, saying, hey, we got to find this place and they've got this specific aspect that we need to be aware of. So for example, a registered sex offender or a felon or mental health, we need to get them into one of the places. The goal is to get them housing, but we kind of got to be aware of the whole system to get them in the appropriate place. And so I think that's the conversation that's really important between the county and the city, the link and others.
And there's lots of different populations, and we talked a little bit about people who are addicted, people with mental health services, and then do you want to talk a little bit about being proactive, I guess, with all of these different populations, and how do you tackle, there's so many layers to unravel. How do you do this, and what are the conversations that you've had just to get it started?
I think one conversation that has been had but hasn't really been had in detail is how can we move to a proactive approach rather than a reactive approach? What are we doing right now that's looking 20 years down the road that says we're going to reduce the homeless population 20 years down the road or lower that amount? And that comes down to conversation about what are we doing with our children and our youth that are in generational challenges, whatever that might be. So that might be saying we got to really elevate high school graduation rates in specific demographics in our community, because without that high school graduation, we all know that that pathway can be difficult moving forward. So I think there's one element of the conversation that we haven't gotten into tons of detail on, but we want to encourage and promote. Let's have conversations about how to be proactive in this. And I think there's a lot of support in the community to say we want to help the children in our city have a different future. So Sioux Falls Thrive is doing really good work on that front. I think there's other conversations that can be had with specific demographics in our community where we can make a difference. Well,
you've done so much in the first 5 months you've been on the city council, just with all of these studies. What do the next 3.5 years look like for you? What do you hope to accomplish?
Well, number one is really I want to stay focused on this and keep a lot of focus on that. A couple of areas are really important. Crime is number one. Phone, email are filling up constantly with questions, shootings, stabbings, drugs, things like that. And there is some questions that need to be asked regarding how are we continuing to support our law enforcement, but more than that, what are we doing to help people re-enter society after they've been in the justice system? I think as a community as a whole, we've got a lot of work to do on that front. And also, housing is continuing to be a challenge in our community. What are we doing to make sure that there's housing for all different levels of the economy, that whether you're making $35,000 a year or $150,000 a year, is housing available? Sure.
And there's challenges on both ends. All right.
Absolutely.
Well, this is the last that we're going to hear about any of these topics. So, well, thank you so much for being here for Inside Town Hall. If you want to get more information on what's going on in the city, you can go to siouxfalls.org. That's our time. See you next month.